Welcome back to the Dad Chronicle. I'm your host, Alex Albisu. This is episode 140. On today's episode, I meet with fellow podcaster and science educator, Maura Armstrong. When I first met Maura, one of the things that we talked about was how important it is to give our kids an opportunity to learn in a safe and effective environment. And as a science educator, she puts on programs like this for kids all the time. So I thought it would be really helpful to bring her to the conversation here at the show. First, we talked about how you can encourage learning with your young child.
When my son was really young, I would try to just learn something new every day was our goal, which actually for toddlers is very easy because they have many things to learn.
We talked about what STEM is and how you can get your kids involved.
I think sometimes people think of, in particular, STEM as this really prescribed thing, and that's kind of a symptom of how it's taught.
We talk about how as parents, we can set a good example of the importance of learning from mistakes.
My tendency is frustration and anger and all those things, which is allowed, but I don't want to hide that from my kids.
And finally, we talk about the importance of teaching your kids how to think critically.
Honing that muscle at a young age is more important now than it has ever been.
Here's my conversation with science educator and podcaster, Maura Armstrong. Maura Armstrong, welcome to the Dad Chronicle. How are you?
I'm doing great, Alex. How are you?
Great. It's so good to see you again. We're looking at each other over Discord here as we're chatting because you were on the other side of the continent and we got to see each other, spend a little bit of time together in Vegas. That's where I got to meet you. And we hit it off, and I said, I got to have her on the Dad Chronicle because of just some of the background and some of your experience. And we'll dive into that. But before we do, why don't we let you do like a little bit of an intro, talk about who you are, some of your background and what you do. And that would be a great place to start.
Okay, awesome. Well, I am a science educator. My job, I work at a science center, and pretty much if anybody comes to the science center, any kids come to the science center without their parents, that's my team. We teach the kids who come for field trips and camps and things like that. That's been my career for the last 16 years. So I get to be there for some of those really exciting aha moments that kids will have. And that's definitely, for me and a lot of the people I work with, that's the currency that keeps it going. I get to kind of construct experiences where that's going to happen. So it's a pretty great job. I love what I do. I'm not a dad, but I am a mom.
Yeah.
So I have two kiddos, one who's 5 and one who's 9. And so I'm just really starting to lean into that middle childhood era, which has always, my whole career working with children, always been my absolute favorite. I love like that, like 6 to 10-ish range, 6 to 12, like that middle time when they're so excited to just try new things and they're really open to stuff, with exceptions, certainly, but they're very open to like trying experiences and having conversations and all of that. So I'm really happy to be talking with you about getting kids engaged in not just science and STEM, but kind of just life and figuring out how to become great humans.
Yeah. Isn't that part of just the magic of parenthood? Helping your kids become good, responsible people in this world. Good humans is a great way to put it.
Exactly.
And not only is Maura one of the smartest people that I've had the privilege of meeting during our time in Vegas, I've also learned that Maura has a heck of a voice, not just for podcasting, because you do have a podcast that you do with a friend of the show, Bobby Frankenberger, but also for belting out some sweet songs and karaoke.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
You were one of the fine folks who had the joy of experiencing me belt a couple tunes,
more than a couple.
not exactly in key.
It was great. It was such a party. It was so fun. That was your first.
So fun. I love karaoke.
Yeah, that was your first time really hanging with any of the Frog Pants crowd, huh?
Yeah, I just met a lot of people for the first time while I was there.
Yeah.
Some of them listened to our show. Some of them didn't. And everyone was so welcoming and so
Yeah.
kind. And there was no like, and you know what? Honestly, I wasn't too worried that I would feel excluded or left out at any point. Partly because I knew a couple people, but I when I got there, it was just an excellent crowd of people. And anytime there's karaoke, there's a chance for me to sing in front of a crowd. I am there. I am
Heck yeah.
1,000% there.
Oh, it's so fun. It's so fun. So we had an opportunity to meet in Vegas. And when we did, I learned a lot about you, the work that you do, some of the activities, and we're going to dive a little bit into some of that. First, I think it's important to kind of tee up a little bit of what STEM is, how we think about the importance of giving your child some of that space to learn. Let's start there, because I think I would love to hear your thoughts on why you think that's important for kids, and hear a little bit more about how you even think about that outside of what you do for a living, and embrace that at home.
Yeah, that's such a big question. It's hard because I feel like kids, when they are first starting to understand how to interpret the world, they get really excited to learn all sorts of different things. And then once they're in school, depending on the philosophy of the school and the specific teachers they get, sometimes learning becomes this chore. It becomes something they're not excited about anymore. And so for me, I always knew, like, you're going to be rolling the dice with whatever teacher your kids get. They may just not thrive in a school environment, but I did choose to continue forward with school, and I wanted to make sure that I had a chance for my kids to explore new things at home. So there's always an opportunity to get excited about learning. So that's kind of how I started as a mom, when I started trying to investigate the world with my kids. I remember when my son was really young, I would try to just learn something new every day was our goal, which actually for toddlers is very easy because they have many things to learn.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And so that's been kind of my mindset, my goal as I learn. And I'm no expert. I am certainly not a parenting expert, but like I mentioned, I love being there for those aha moments. And when it's your kids, you get to be present for a lot of those. So I wanted to make sure that I had that set up for them.
Yeah, I think a lot about something that you said was kind of profound, and it made me actually reflect a little bit on just the way I grew up, those learning moments, feeling like chores, and I think that my 4-year-old son Jake, he's very similar in this regard. School is never my thing. I realized that as I was growing up, the more I was able to really get hands on with learning versus that textbook learning. They talk about, like, kinetic learning versus reading or anything like that. And I was very much a kinetic learner. And I'm curious, how do you feel like you are able to identify the right ways that your kids maybe glom onto a certain approach to how they can be taught and really embracing the subject?
That's a really good question. I feel like in order to start there, especially with STEM, you kind of have to let go of your expectations of how this is supposed to be taught, and how you even the end goal with your kid. And there are some things where you don't have that luxury. If you want your kid to properly sweep a floor, you're going to have to teach them how to properly sweep a floor. But if you're exploring nature, there's no curriculum. You can go out, and if they're excited about bird calls, you can look up an app that identifies birds. If they're excited about trees, you can try to find a good climbing tree. There's a million different spaces. I think sometimes people think of, in particular, STEM as this really prescribed thing, and that's kind of a symptom of how it's taught, because especially I think for millennials. It's a little bit less now, but even more so, the further you go back in generations, you have this sort of this is the answer kind of vibe.
Yeah.
Here's the book. Science says this. The math comes out to this number. And that this is how these things work. So learn it and tell me that you learned it, and that's it. But that's really not what science is. Science is a way of investigating the world around you, and it starts with questions and it starts with observations. And kids do those all the time naturally. So if you're just following those threads of curiosity, if you're seeing what they're seeing and trying to get excited about the observations they make, follow them down those paths, and it's just a lot easier,
right,
than trying to be like, and now here is the list of different types of trees that we're seeing.
Yeah.
Because why did we categorize trees that way anyway? Who cares? The kid doesn't care. Let's just look at the colors of the leaves and then move on when a bee scares them.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Yeah.
It happens. So I think that's a key part is people get really anxious about, like, my kid needs to know all of these things. And maybe you have a big life plan set up for your kid. I think some parents are very much like that. They want, to make sure that the grades are there and that the kids are able to get to a certain point and succeed. That's a different way of parenting. There's nothing wrong with that either, but that is not necessarily going to foster a love of learning.
Yeah, that resonates a lot with me, and I don't think that my parents necessarily ever pushed me in a certain direction. I think that, to your point, I think that when we were millennials growing up in that sort of educational environment, that's just how it was. And to see our kids having a different opportunity, different teaching styles really being embraced and other approaches, I think that it's just really empowering, not just as a parent, but just for the kid, and, taking a step back, I realize we're talking STEM. Can you, what is STEM? Do you mind just explaining what that is?
Oh boy. Well, okay. So while it stands for science, technology, engineering, and math, people will add an A into there, call it STEAM, throw in the arts. And it's tough because I've heard a tongue-in-cheek description of STEM that it is a strategic term for extracting money. It's this idea that if we focus on these core things, our kids will be able to succeed in the workplace, will develop strong science skills. And so the money piece is generally, if you say you do STEM, you maybe will get a few more grants, a few more dollars at your school or whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
So I'm not, like, the term STEM, I can't say I'm like super attached to it specifically, but the way I try to approach it in my work and in my life is the idea that everything we do is connected. Science, technology, engineering, art, math, and then you layer on everything else, the humanities, and physical education, all of that. It all is connected, and the acronym will start to get unwieldy if we add it all in. But I think that there is an opportunity to understand the world from sort of the ground up if you consider the connections that exist between the many, many things around us. So that's how I think of it. And to me, I've always been excited about the science side of things. I love the investigations of science and the finding those detailed observations and being able to catalog them and make new discoveries that way. To me, that's totally fascinating and incredible, but it's connected to so many other things. And your kid might be excited about that aspect or maybe something else. You never know.
Yeah, I think a lot about how, for me, again, just thinking back to when I was a kid, and I still joke about it to this day. Like I joke that math and numbers give me a nosebleed, like if I'm looking at it too long. But I also think a lot about how those approaches were incorrect for me, because as an adult, as I look at it now in sort of a different context, maybe it's just having matured over the years, but I think a lot about how the context in which I'm approaching some of these topics, being very fascinated by some of these other things and some of the work that I do that is just inherently related to numbers and some other things, I'm realizing, wow, this is actually really fascinating, really interesting. So what do you think about like in how you're approaching topics like math or science in some of those instances, making it feel approachable for a kid who may be feeling a little shy about it?
I think as parents, that one of the best things we can teach our kids is to investigate their own curiosity. Your kid may not be curious about math. They may feel similar to you, Alex, and start getting nosebleeds when they think about it. But because of that connected nature of everything, getting excited about something, looking into it, trying to figure it out, there's going to be a leverage point there at some point. And if you know how to investigate your own curiosity and you have the passion and excitement to do so, then you're going to, I think, succeed at understanding things a little bit more than if you're just kind of blindly looking into things, or you don't quite have the critical thinking ability to parse which of these facts, which of these analyses is helpful or which is not. And I think too, there's like, if you're going to be following your own curiosity, it's also okay to be bad at something. And I mean, we all know this, and especially with kids, because kids, when they first do something, I mean, they're always bad at it because they just did it for the very first time, like using a spoon. They can't get it into their mouth, but eventually they figure it out. And when they're really young, they can handle that. But as they get a little older, there's sort of a developmental stage in those middle years where kids just want to be competent, and any hint of incompetence makes them feel, they'll kind of squirm out of it. They'll be like, it was slipping. It fell down. Oh, that thing moved. I couldn't hit it because it was, the sun was in my eyes. Like they don't like that feeling. So it's a perfect time to teach them that honestly, anything worth doing is worth doing badly. You can sit around and do things badly and because you have never attempted it before, and then move on from that. You can keep getting better and better and better, or just drop it. So I feel like I meandered pretty far from your question.
No. But actually, it's bringing up a really interesting thought, because we talk about making room for making mistakes, for some of that. And as a parent, and I talked to your co-host Bobby about this in his episode, but making room for kids to feel like they can make mistakes. Like I remember when my daughter was 3 or whatever, learning to put on socks, of all the things, was triggering me. I was just put the freaking sock on. But you're talking to a 3-year-old. And my son, how does he learn how to hit a ball playing t-ball, catching and throwing the ball, little things that you take for granted around simple motor skills, just as an example. And you can go on a completely different end of the spectrum when you're talking about learning new subjects like math and science and other things like that, where there's inherently a lot of testing and other things that you have to be doing, and failure involved with that. How do we create that room for kids to fail, and then also create room for parents to feel like they're able to give grace and have that patience?
Oh, that's a big question. And I think, and certainly I'm not a parenting expert, but I like to try, and I fail at this all the time, in sort of a meta twist. I try to let the kids see me fail and recover as much as I can. Like if I'm messing something up, my tendency is frustration and anger and all those things, which is allowed. But I don't want to hide that from my kids. I want them to see the anger and the frustration, and then sometimes I'll talk it through. Like if I'm really annoyed, I'll talk it through them sort of post-mortem. I'll be like, okay, so mom got really frustrated there because, but the hard part to me is that kids also react very differently to failure. I have one who will like roll with it and one who will not. And it's hard to like, because we had a similar sock issue. Socks are hard to put on.
Yeah.
Can I just say, like, it's not easy to do that. Also, reading's really hard. Now I'm really going off topic.
Do it.
We forget that reading is extremely difficult. And we teach it to like 5 and 6-year-olds who are like just, sometimes 4-year-olds. They're just at the point where they can start to understand it. And it's also extremely hard to teach someone to read. So give a kindergarten teacher high five, because holy moly, it is hard to do.
Yeah.
And having kids makes you realize, again, you're like, oh, right. These things that I do without thinking are really, really hard. And then one of them, depending on the temperament of your child, one of them might be like, oh, that didn't work. And one of them might be like, just losing their mind. And you as a parent then have to manage both those reactions, because the second one feels way worse at the time. But the first one can also sometimes be an issue, because sometimes it's like an internalization, and it's like learning, oh, I'm not good at stuff. Or you might end up maybe just apathy, like they're just like meh, and they just kind of want to drift through things.
Right.
So you can, it's a lot easier to deal with, that's for sure, but it might not always be indicating just being chill. There could be something else going on. You kind of got to dig. But yeah, that's just, I don't know if you have any advice on dealing with kids who have trouble with failure.
Yeah, I don't, like the things I think about often are, I think that we say to use grace, but really what does that mean? I think because in the moment, the biggest thing that I have trouble with is in the moment realizing how frustrated I'm getting in wanting to help my kids and have them just understand something versus just taking a step back. And frankly, I think it all starts with that, though. One of the things I found is mindfulness and just understanding, hey, I've got this tendency, or utilizing a partner or some outside force to be like, hey, you're getting kind of frustrated with your kid. And to parents out there, like, that's just going to be the natural piece of parenting. You're going to get frustrated with your kid. How do you just be mindful and sense how your body is reacting? When your shoulders start to tense a little bit, you start to that vein in your neck starts to pop a little more than it should, like little things like that. And I think that it all starts with that. But at the same time, I think if we even make it a little bit more meta, it's all practice. We have to fail. And what is parenting if not failing every single day and just figuring it out as you go?
Oh my gosh.
Man,
it's very true.
Yeah.
It's very true. I feel like too, there's also a really important role for the aunties, the uncles, the grandmas and grandpas there. Like, my example is riding a bike. I'm not good at teaching physical skills. And so I struggle with that. And I, for both my kids, teaching them how to ride a bike was really tough for me. But my father-in-law is like on it. He's, loves sports his whole life and he also loves that like middle childhood range. And he was in there and he taught both my kids how to ride a bike. The youngest one just recently. And so letting someone else handle it is also an option sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't have that option.
Well, it takes a village, I mean, that's like a very true statement.
Someone who's excited. Oh my gosh. Yes. It's so true.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
One other thing I wanted to circle back on that you were talking about, and I think this leads really well into kind of the next piece of STEM and some of the work that you do translating into parenthood, is this idea of critical thinking. I think that especially in a world that we live in today, which is very different from when I think we grew up, information overload, a lot of answers, quote unquote, at our fingertips, that can be very easily, let's say, just accepted versus thinking critically about what's actually going on here. How at a young age can we start instilling this sense of critical thinking with our kids, maybe starting as early as how old our kids are, because our kids are about the same age?
I have an answer and an update. I think that when you're teaching critical thinking, it's important not to like offer the answer. You know, if a kid asks a difficult question, walk them through the logic of it and let them decide what their opinion is, and don't judge it. And don't, even if you disagree with it, that's fine. You can have that conversation too. But letting them get there on their own, to me, is the best way to teach critical thinking. I remember one time I said something to my dad. I was mad at my dad and I said, "Oh, you don't care about my opinion." He's like, "Well, what's your opinion on capital punishment?" And I was like, "What's capital punishment?" So he explained it, and then I was like, "Oh, well, that sounds bad. I guess I land on the no side." And then it ended up being this. Then he gave me this big lecture about his opinion and all this. So there was the whole like big possibility. There was very much possibility to dive into critical thinking in that moment.
Yeah.
But instead, my dad, told me what he thought, and I think back to that sometimes because there was no, like, he was trying to pull me through, like, here's why, here are my reasons, here's what I believe. And I just felt kind of annoyed the whole time. I was like, I feel like you're doing exactly what I just said. Like, you don't care about my opinion. And I have no idea what he said. Like, I couldn't tell you, but
Right.
Trying to teach the basics of logic, through lecturing kids about opinions on things is never going to work. You got to walk through them with it. Now, here's my update. I think this is vitally, vitally important to be able to do this because generative AI is already starting to alter our cognition and change our capabilities for critical thinking, because we're starting to outsource and offload critical thinking to AI in some circumstances.
Yeah.
And so honing that muscle at a young age is more important now than it has ever been. So I know that can feel, that's very anxiety inducing. So
right.
It's okay. You can still do it. And all the AI things that we are all probably stressing about, they're moving forward the way they are. There's things we have to accept and things we have to change. But one thing I think you need to make sure, I feel as a parent that I need to make sure, is that I'm offering my kids as many chances as I can to walk down like those logic roads together.
That is so important. And you touched on the AI piece. I think a lot about that as well. I think a lot about how the world in just 5 years, right? But like even in like 10 years, when our kids are old enough to enter the workforce, it's going to be a completely different experience than the situation that we're in now. So the AI piece, I think, is especially interesting. And we're just now starting to get to that point. This is like, it reminds me a lot of when we were growing up with the internet. People were like, unsure, like, how do you know how to bar your kids from seeing all those terrible things on the internet? Like my parents had no idea. My dad worked in information security for over 30 years for AT&T, and he had, very cutting edge at that time ideas on how to do some of these things, but it's antiquated now, So if we as parents in this generation, having grown up with that, know how to deal with it. And now I feel like we are in that mode of figuring out, how do we parent in this age of AI? Yeah. And then our kids, when they have kids, are going to be like, we got it. It's fine. So I think the best thing that we can do is really just like, we have to let them, obviously it's guardrails. I think of it like Bowling alleys,
yeah.
you have those guardrails, right? Like the ball is going to bounce back and forth. It's going to be violent, but it will get there and it'll knock down some pins. So I think I think that in this situation, it's a similar analogy, right? I also think back to something that you were talking about, especially in your situation with your dad. One thing that I've learned about a lot, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this around critical thinking, is hold off on giving your opinion in general. Just ask the question, like, what do you think about this? And just let them talk and ask them, okay, well, why do you think that? Because I think that, and I actually, for work and stuff, I was taking some, typical like leadership courses, but, and some of it's just like crazy corporate jargon stuff. But one of the things that was really profound was, they talked about how good leaders don't necessarily give their opinion first. They always look to seek the opinion of others. And I thought about how that translated so much into how we can drive critical thinking with our kids. So I was wondering if that kind of resonated with you, and if you had any maybe experiences of doing that with your own kids, or thinking about the programs that you help run and some of the work that you do.
I think it ties back to the piece about exploration and getting excited about the world and learning on your own terms.
Yeah.
Because I'm always thinking, at some point you're going to be an adult. What kind of pressures are you going to face? What do I have to do every day to remain the best possible adult I can be? And a lot of that is being able to think critically and being able to make the right decision in the right moment. And knowing that, I think it's really good to give your kids the opportunity to make choices.
Yeah.
Sometimes little things like what's for dinner or whatever, but also what to explore. And this is one of the things that can be kind of annoying, because if you have a 2-year-old and what they want to explore is how many stuffed animals can I line up for the next half hour, and they want you there, and it can be kind of hard. It can be excruciating sometimes. You're like, okay, here goes another one. I'm lining it up. I'm doing the exact same thing again. My brain is understimulated. But following the thread of what the kids want to do, I think it'll help, because they're excited about it. They want to understand it. They want to dig in on it. And also, bringing them along when you have things you have to do.
Yeah.
Is also key. I think you're that guide. This also sometimes sucks, because then you have to like explain every piece, and then they do it wrong and all of that. But that, you're building that, you're scaffolding them into being able to manage these things on their own and to think them through. Don't always pick the answer. Just let them kind of figure out where you think the best place for the knives are in this dishwasher. And then the other thing this is the fun one, is introducing them to new things and learning together. Let them watch you go through that process. That's
interesting.
Beside each other. That one too, because you're introducing them to something, you get to pick it. That's the fun one, because I don't know, if you like gardening, gardening is one of my favorite examples of an amazing thing to do with your kids, because it is one of the kind of a nexus point, especially in like domestic life generally, where you're learning science, you're learning technology and math and engineering and art, and everything comes together in gardening. Plus you're outside.
Yeah.
You're finding worms. You're doing, it can be fun too, right? Like, especially if they're learning a couple skills and then they run off and do something, you don't have to like it's okay. Yeah. It's okay if they get muddy, they're not going to break your glasses. So yeah, that's I feel like just being alongside them while they explore, that's the best.
That is, and I really love that example of gardening. I think that's such a, and I was actually going to ask, like, what are some good examples of things that, as parents are listening to this and thinking about the little things that they could do, whether they realize it or not, to embrace that experience of learning and getting uncomfortable in situations and feeling like they can all fail together. Like, yeah, gardening is a great example of that. What are some other ways, maybe some of the work that you're doing, or even some of the things that you're doing at home, to really embrace that?
I think that that one of the big things, we don't always talk about it, but having a student or your child feeling really emotionally stable is the very first thing. We can't really learn. I mean, you do learn when you're under duress, but what you're learning is very different from what you probably want.
Yeah.
And the example of my dad, asking my opinion, I didn't feel interested. I didn't feel comfortable. I felt, I felt like a kid. I felt like I wasn't, my thoughts were not important in that space. So it kind of made me feel bad.
Yeah.
And so I didn't really learn much other than, okay, don't tell dad your opinion. Like, this is not a good space to be. And this, my dad's great. It's not, it was a moment. We all make mistakes. And that was one that I remember.
Yep.
But yeah, I feel like if you two are seeing your kid fail over and over and they're so frustrated and intense and upset, there is a point where it's time to distract. And I just, honestly, my move, and this is controversial, if my kid's at like the absolute top edge, cannot calm down, I put on the headphones, stick the tablet in front of them, and put on a show.
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing else that I've been able to do when my kids get up to like 11 emotionally, I'm like, you know what? I accept that I cannot change this. So tunnel focus on something new, let the heart rate come down, and then we talk about it after. So not everyone agrees with that approach, and that's fine. If you have other ways, I'm sure they exist.
Yeah. I think it's valid. I really, we do the same thing with our kids. I mean, honestly, it's nothing. I don't think there's anything wrong with it if your kid is just overstimulated. I mean, it's a pacifier of sorts. It's a similar sort of a thing. Yeah. We do the same thing with our own. You can call them vices or whatever you want to call them. But if we need to just decompress after a day and just sit down and relax, and perhaps even like, I got a pressure weighted blanket, like some of those things. Right. So like, nice. I think about how that just helps to like take away that stimulation. And sometimes if kids are just, especially at school all day, and they've been stimulated all day and they just need to relax, and however that works, if it's, something that's done with responsibility from the parent and the parent gives it the blessing, it's like, of course. So I think that's, and to your point, it's creating this sense of safety. And it comes back to like the Laszlo hierarchy of needs, right? Like, you've got this base, this foundation of feeling safety, and you're able to kind of then build on top of it. So I think it's extremely valid. So next time my kids are overstimulated doing gardening, which I'm going to take them out and do sometime here in the next few days, because we got some little wildflower seeds, and I was thinking about doing that. And this is a really good example of like, we can do that. I will, amazing. If they get upset, I'll just, hey, let's go watch Bluey. Let's go chill for a little bit, just let them chill out.
Yeah. Sometimes you just need an out, like, just to cut through the noise. And I've done other things, cookies, bath. Sometimes that'll work. Just something they like doing. But gardening, though, probably not going to get them there.
Yeah.
That's the great thing about it.
Nice.
If they're like trying to learn how to ride a bike, is the one on top of my mind, because that was the recent one, and they keep failing, they might get heightened. But in a garden, if you put the seed in the wrong spot, well.
Yeah.
It's fine.
It is what it is.
Especially
And you've learned.
Wildflowers.
Yeah.
You'll be good.
Yeah, you've learned.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think this has been a really, really helpful conversation. I always appreciate your perspective, especially like when we got to talking and just having conversations like this together in Vegas. It was a lot of fun. And you and Bobby, who again was on this show before, he's a buddy of mine. We had a really good conversation in a similar vein, and you guys talk a lot about science and some of these approaches that aren't parenting focused, but I'm sure a lot of parents would kind of jive with the stuff that you guys talk about. I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk to the Dad Chronicle audience and just say, hey, this is a little bit about our project and some of the things that we do. So where can people reach you, and like what sort of stuff do you talk about on your show?
Well, our show is called All Around Science. And it's a general science and news show. We take time to dig in on a news article and then some other topic, which can really run the gamut. It can be what did we do recently? We talked about chiropractors.
Yeah.
Bobby kept saying it in a different way than I would have, so that's why I tripped up on it. But
chiropractic.
We did that recently. We've been going through a bunch of.
Yeah, is that the call? Is that what it's called, chiropractic? Because like I go to a chiropractor, but yeah, I'll be interested to hear that one because that's going to be.
The person.
Yeah. I have thoughts on it. I'm not quite sure if it works. Sometimes I feel like it does, and then I don't know if it does. So yeah, I'm going to be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay, well, listen to that. That was Bobby's, and he taught me some stuff I had no idea about chiropractic. There it is, chiropractic. Yeah. So things like that. And then like we talked about the 4 fundamental forces a while back. We have a couple of different episodes on a whole bunch of different things. We recently re-released our eel sex episode, which is so interesting.
Eel sex.
That was one of my favorites to research. Eel sex, yes. One of our goals is to create science content that is accessible at about an 8th grade level. So it's okay for younger kids. They can listen. I think my son said he caught about 40% of it. That was actually what he said. I was like, are you understanding this? He's like, about 40%. I was like,
it's something.
How do you know that that's 40%? that also I was curious about. Anyway, yeah, but I do have a couple of friends of mine have mentioned, one friend in particular who's a social worker said she liked to listen to it with her kids because her kids at work, because she wasn't afraid that we would suddenly start swearing.
Yeah.
And it's all, appropriate. Like we do sometimes talk about sex, so that's, forewarned.
Mm-hmm.
But it is all very, science-based and nothing too crazy that is beyond the grade 8 level. So that's our goal. And we would love to see some of you nerds come and listen, with or without your kids.
Yeah. Go listen to All Around Science. It's a lot of fun. These guys did a live show at the TMS Vegas event, and so that was a lot of fun to watch you guys do your thing. And
it was a blast.
Yeah, and it was great to meet you out there as well. I'm hoping that we'll see you at Nerdtacular or something in one of the next events coming up, and we'll have a match up again for some karaoke goodness.
Absolutely.
Well, very good.
We'll have to do a duet next time.
Heck yeah, let's do it. Bobby and I duetted Scott, and it was beautiful. And so I think that maybe you and I duet Bobby.
Tears to my eyes.
Yeah, we'll just we'll serenade him next time. You hear that, Bobby?
Yeah.
It's coming. It's coming. Our guest again
I'll
has
keep my
been,
ear to the ground for the best song. Sorry.
No, you're good. Our guest again has been Maura Armstrong. Hey, Maura, where can people reach you on the internet? Is it just the podcast is the best way to do that, or do you have any other places that people should check you out on socials or anything?
Yeah, find us All Around Science on socials, or All Around Sci. You can find us there. I'm not really active on many personal accounts, but if you happen across me and give me a follow, I might say hello in about 6 months. And I do love Discord. So if you join the All Around Science Discord, even if you don't listen to the podcast, you can do that. So you can do that on our website, allaroundscience.com. Find us there, and I'll see you on the Discord, or hopefully you get a chance to listen to a couple episodes. Yeah,
absolutely. All right. Our guest today has been Maura Armstrong. Thank you again for the time today.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you again to Maura for being on the show. Make sure you go check out All Around Science. That's a great show. A lot of fun topics. Bobby and Maura are great, so make sure you go listen to that. And if you'd like to chime in on anything that we talked about, be sure to email us, the Dad Chronicle Podcast @gmail.com. And as a reminder, if you'd like to listen to other episodes, you can head over to thedadchronicle.com. There's a lot of great content there. There's a search bar where you can search for other shows or topics or whatever you want to find, and listen to other conversations with parenting experts or other dads in the community. And if you'd like to support this show, you can do so by becoming a patron. Head over to supportadad.com. Thanks again for listening, and remember, be good to yourself, be good to others out there, and we'll see you next time.
If you like this show, check out more great content at incastmedianetwork.com.